Thank you very much. I'm going to try and take some clues from Ian's talk earlier and speak very clearly. It's going to be hard because I've only got 10 minutes, so I got a lot to cover. As John already pointed out, I've been around here for quite a while in the games industry in Austin. I unfortunately left to California for a little while, but I came back quickly as I could. So one of the things that I wanted to point out is that my company and my background personally is PC games, but mostly in consoles. And my own company, I started to do WiiWare project when Nintendo had first announced it. And we enjoyed working on the console, but as time's gone on, we've seen that the opportunities are elsewhere. And so my studio has changed from a console-focused studio to more of a social, and in the future soon, I believe mobile. But it's incredibly disruptive right now in the games industry. You're finding, if you watch the news, there's several different companies are either buying up other mobile or social companies, or they're spinning off their own. Some are just changing wholesale. And that disruptive change is, it's causing a lot of strife, but it also requires a lot of retooling and a complete new understanding of how, not just how to make games for, say, for example, Facebook, but how do we make games? Because it's not the same. The kind of things that we do every day is not the same. And the transformation that we've undergone in the past 4 months is really remarkable, and I thought I'd share that with you here. So without further ado, I'll try and get through some more of my slides. So a really good example of what a startup is, because in terms of development, I think game teams tend to be a lot like what a startup is. And obviously, you know, this quote here is about how it's about humans and how it's about making new products and how it's about extreme uncertainty. That's every game team. I don't care what company you work for. You are a little startup, even inside the biggest umbrella, like Electronic Arts or something like that. Your team is a startup, whether you think of it that way or not. So what makes you a startup is that there's absolutely no guarantee that your product is going to be a success, not even with the sequel. Startups in general, though, not just games, startups fail because there's no customers, not because the product was bad. And you'll see that in a second. Digest that for a moment. Your product may not be bad, but you still may fail. That's something that consoles in general and PC games don't really respond to. They don't really get that in the development cycle. But success does not really, like I said, doesn't depend on the quality of your game. That's just one factor. I believe that the most important factor is what's outside the box, not what's inside of it. Some lousy games succeed. We've seen that too. Some great games fail. But the fact is, games fail if they don't have enough customers to support their development. That's just a matter of numbers. How do you know if you should put 10 million into this game development or 2 million? Well, you need to measure how many people are going to buy your game. That's kind of a crapshoot, unfortunately. And also, that's why I believe that retail is kind of doomed and why web games and mobile games are taking off, even when they're not always the best games. So looking at this chart here, this is research that I found online. Heavenly Sword, Psychonauts, Shenmue, fantastic games. Not one of them made money. And Shenmue, for example, cost so much that every Dreamcast owner would have to buy 2 copies to break even. Not the best business strategy. So retail games take years to develop, and nobody knows if the game is going to be a success until after it's fully developed, and that's pretty risky. That's why so many games are sequels, because, well, once you've decided as a customer to buy a game, it's much easier to decide to buy another one because you know what you're expecting, and they don't have to sell you on a brand new type of game. The other thing about consoles, and not so much PC, but to some degree any kind of published game, is that developers and publishers don't really own their customers because they're going through some other sales channel. Console operators do, though, and that's where Microsoft and Nintendo and Sony all get their benefit. They own their own customers. We can't contact the customers very easily, in some cases not at all. And that's, unfortunately, means that marketing is very, very expensive, and today there's a lot of alternatives for people. And because new IP, any kind of game that you're making, you have to grow your customer base from zero. They don't know about your game. You have to tell them about it, and that's very, very expensive. Sequels, like I said, they're less risky because, you know, new IP, you have to build new customer bases, but you have one built in. You don't necessarily have all the return sales, but at least you start with something. And publishers, this is kind of funny, publishers mitigate their risk by buying a bunch of studios and making more bets, something that an individual can't do. A small studio can't do that. But a publisher, what they do is they buy a whole bunch of companies, and they admit to themselves they have no idea why their games are good and which ones are going to sell, but they throw enough darts and some of them hit bullseyes, and that covers the development cost for all the rest of them. Isn't that bad? So that just basically admits that retail is random, and even the big publishers don't have a clue. And right now, retail is killing publishers because the successes no longer cover the development costs of the failures. So some kind of aside is that games are not cars. Let's get that clear. Games are definitely not cars. It's a very creative process. Cars, there's a little creativity, but that happens before the first one rolls out. We can learn, though, from what Toyota has discovered years and years and years ago was something they called lean manufacturing. Actually, they called it Kanban because they're Japanese, but we call it lean manufacturing. And what that was is that warehouses don't make money. Warehouses can't make money. They're warehouses. So when Taiichi Ono walked into the warehouse, he said, I don't care how you do it. Next year, I'm going to walk back in here, and this had better not be a warehouse. And he left, and he didn't give them directions on how to do that. So what they did is they came up with, well, everything needs to be a production facility then. He didn't specify that, but that's the logical conclusion. It's not a warehouse, so now we're producing parts. Oh, parts can make money. That's cool. But in order for it not to be a warehouse, they couldn't store things there, so they had to figure out how not to store stuff, which meant developing things in the order and in the time that you needed them for the next stage. And that's what Kanban is. And I won't go through all these individually, but basically you can get the slides off my website, and I think John will make them available. But this is like my refactored version of what exactly lean manufacturing is as it pertains to games. And I'd like to note that because retail games don't know when something's going to sell, and they have to pool all their assets until the game ships, retail games and console developers are basically warehouses. So in terms of what iterative development is, that's the way that social games work, is you don't make the whole game, you make some of the game, and you make enough of it that people are interested in it, and you throw it out there and you hope that people like it. The great thing about that you can't do, because it's fundamentally incompatible with retail, and that includes XBLA, PSN, WiiWare, all those, you can't put out a game half finished and expect people to pay $60. They're just not going to do it. Some people maybe, but not too many. I mean, Minecraft is kind of an example, but if you think about it in terms of iterative development, you don't have to build a whole game. You just have to build enough of it that people either say, yeah, I like it, or no, I don't like it. And if they like it, then you build more. If they don't like it, you stop building it, and then you've cut your losses, and you can make something else that maybe they do like. The other thing about retail is the digital distribution was this great panacea, and it was at least sold to indie developers, and I'm one of them that bit that hook, line, and sinker, that yes, I want to get past the publishers. I don't want to talk through all these channels. I want to talk straight to my constituency, the customers who are going to buy my game. And I realized that in the end, digital distribution platforms, they do make distribution cheaper, but that really only benefits people who pay for distribution. That's the publisher. But the royalty rates haven't changed for developers. So we, in the end, still have the same amount of uncertainty because we're still throwing it over the fence and hoping people care. And we don't get any extra benefit for it. So to make matters worse, the virtual shelves that are on these services tend to be worse than retail, because when you walk into a computer store, you see what's cool and hot now. You have this enormous 1,000 list of games that came out in the last 5 years that everyone maybe, they may not see your game at all. By the time that they do hear about your game, maybe it's too passé. They don't care. They're not going to dig through and find what they want from you. So one of the things that is really interesting about social and online development models is that it's just fundamentally different than retail. And games don't have to be completely finished, but what these show is that you can be incredibly you make a ton of money. You can just throw it out there, and people like it, they flock to you, and you make more. Running out of time, so don't want to hold you up from beer. So basically what Kanban shows is that there's end users, and everybody has some customers, and the end users are the ultimate customers, and retail fundamentally does not obey the law of what those people want because they don't know until they're finished whether it was something that they wanted or not. Social games tend to connect directly with people, and that makes them more agile in terms of how their development process works. So they can take feedback immediately and roll it into what they do. And I'll skip the rest of these. Basically, those are things that I've done in my own studio. But here's some keywords. If you really care about it, check this stuff out. It's really good. Thanks.